On her deathbed, Queen Isabella of Castile begged her husband never to remarry. Just 2 years later, he broke that promise, and the way he did it was utterly disgusting. Isabella was never supposed to be queen, but she schemed and fought her way to the throne. In the end, she changed history, but it wasn't always for the better. The daughter of King John II of Castile and Isabella of Portugal was born in 1451. By the time she was 2, her older brother Henry and newborn brother Alfonso were ahead of her in line for the throne. Henry's future children would automatically supplant her as well. King John died when Isabella was 3, and the new King Henry dragged Isabella and Alfonso from their mother. The kingdom was a mess, and he wanted control of all of his heirs and their matches. Isabella began to learn about her key role in these political games. She realised she was nothing more than a product for her brother to trade for alliances. Henry proved this by matching her with Afonso V of Portugal, his 33-year-old brother-in-law. The 14-year-old Isabella refused to marry him. Civil unrest broke out a year later, and to please the rebels, Henry matched Isabella with the 43-year-old Pedro Pacheco. But when he was on his way to meet her, he fell sick and died. Isabella was relieved, but she also learned her lesson. She needed control over her own fate. The opportunity came when rumours started to spread that Henry was impotent and that his daughter Joanna wasn't legitimate. A group of nobles demanded that Henry name Alfonso, who they controlled, as his successor, and eventually they went to war over it. Henry agreed as long as Alfonso agreed to marry his daughter, but a year later Alfonso succumbed to suspected poisoning. In his absence, the nobles encouraged Isabella to champion the rebellion and seize the throne. Most teenagers would give in to the pressure, but Isabella was different. She had a better idea that would end the fighting and give herself a leg up. She struck a deal. Henry would name Isabella his heir instead of Joanna, and Isabella wouldn't marry without his permission, but he couldn't force her to marry anyone. Isabella was playing the long game, and she intended to win. But it turns out Isabella made a deal with the devil. She began husband hunting behind Henry's back. The choice soon became clear to her: Ferdinand, the newly minted King of Sicily and heir to the Kingdom of Aragon. Ferdinand was one of the many suitors Henry had tried to force on Isabella when she was a child, but this time Isabella was 18 and holding the reins. Ferdinand was age appropriate, but most importantly, they were a match made in diplomacy. Once married, the two could unite their lands, Castile and Aragon, into one kingdom. This was the match that had the potential to give Isabella the most power, but what should have been a straightforward political arrangement turned into a Romeo and Juliet style drama. Isabella still needed her brother's permission to marry. Henry had had a falling out with Ferdinand's father, John II of Navarre, after the first attempt to betroth the two heirs had failed. Everyone knew that there was no way Henry would sanction the union. So Isabella and Ferdinand did everything from negotiating to planning the wedding in secret and without ever meeting in person. Henry sensed that something was going on. Before he went on a trip, he confronted Isabella and made her swear that she wouldn't marry without his permission. Henry even vowed to lock her up if she left the city. Isabella promised that she'd behave. Isabella and Ferdinand insisted on a proper wedding, but this was dangerous. Ferdinand was to sneak into Castile, which was still Henry's kingdom, disguised as a servant. And to top it off, they'd be meeting for the first time. The teenagers weren't sure they'd even like each other. Isabella and Ferdinand's gamble paid off. They weren't necessarily a love match, but agreed to be fair to each other once they came into power. Isabella was pregnant within 3 months, but unfortunately for her, Ferdinand had a love for sleeping around. The devout Isabella already knew this, but probably figured things would be different after the wedding. She saw how promiscuity, or even rumours of it, destroyed her sister-in-law's life, so she created an image of piety. Whenever Ferdinand went away, Isabella made all her ladies-in-waiting sleep in her bedroom to ensure she had witnesses to her loyalty. The same can't be said for Ferdinand. He continued to have more affairs and illegitimate children. He even recognised some of those offspring. Isabella's messy childhood forged an iron self-control within her, but even she couldn't cope with Ferdinand betraying her over and over. She took his cheating much more personally than most monarchs in political arrangements would. If she suspected that any woman in their court piqued his interest, she found ways to get rid of them. On at least one occasion, people overheard them screaming and brawling, the fight ending with Isabella sobbing. Her children watched their otherwise unbreakable mother fall apart over Ferdinand's infidelity. Not long after their secret marriage, King Henry had discovered that Isabella broke their agreement and lied to him. In response, he disinherited her. He took her titles and valuables. He had his spies stalk the new couple. He even plotted to abduct them. So, on top of the cracks in their own relationship, the newlyweds spent much of their marriage broke and evading capture. Everything came to a head when Henry died, when Isabella was 23. After her disinheritance, Henry's daughter Joanna had been reinstated as heir, but many still believed that she wasn't their impotent king's legitimate child. Both women had the desire to be queen, and the supporters to back them up. Isabella believed that God himself chose her to be queen. Both sides refused to back down. All the while, Ferdinand had no idea. The couple were living in separate towns when Henry died. When he finally showed up, he declared he was returning to Aragon. That would be the end of their marriage, and Isabella knew she needed a husband to rule. She guilted him over his plan and the effect it would have on the future of their children. She soothed his ego, and in the end, they came to an agreement. They'd portray themselves as equal rulers in Castile. Ferdinand got to save face, while Isabella got the real power, and she had to use it right away. With her marriage issues settled, Isabella still had to struggle with her niece Joanna over the throne. Joanna even went so far as to marry their uncle Alfonso, the King of Portugal, to get his country on her side. They traded blows and suffered heavy casualties for a year. Both sides celebrated their victories at the Battle of Toro, but it was the beginning of the end for Joanna. In the end, Isabella emerged victorious, but the kingdom was in shambles. Her brother Henry had been a reckless spender. He didn't enforce laws. People felt like they could get away with the worst offences. The state of Castile was appalling, and no one had high hopes for Isabella. But no one, not even Isabella's own supporters, knew who they were dealing with. Most assumed that she'd be a figurehead, a symbol, while Ferdinand and his advisors ruled. But Isabella didn't go through all that for nothing. She got to work. She reduced crime and debt, and she was just getting started. Isabella continued to prove everyone wrong. In her first year as ruler, a rebellion broke out in Segovia. Her advisors told her to stay home while the men handled it. The 25-year-old ignored them and rode out herself to negotiate with the rebels. Thanks to her skills of persuasion, the rebellion was over as quickly as it started. But Isabella didn't just win fights, she also won hearts. Every Friday, the two monarchs made themselves available. People could come, sit, and complain. In Castile, it was unheard of for a ruler to have that kind of relationship with their subjects. Isabella continued leading her kingdom to greater power, security, and prosperity. But not everything she did was good. In fact, a lot of it was downright brutal. When Castile conquered the Muslim stronghold of Granada in 1492, Isabella and Ferdinand promised its subjects religious tolerance. Then, they forced everyone to convert to Christianity. Isabella began the Spanish Inquisition in 1478, and it lasted for centuries. The ultimate goal was religious and ethnic purity. People were convicted on weak or non-existent evidence. Countless subjects were forced to convert, hide their beliefs, or be ran out of their homes. Thousands of the unluckiest people met their end on a burning stake. Artists used to openly make fun of the previous king, Henry, but everyone soon realised that if they valued their lives, they had to shut up about Isabella. People rarely directly criticised the Queen. If someone was brave enough to do it, they wound up executed. Isabella was making enemies left and right. Christopher Columbus had to ask Isabella to support his expedition 3 times before she caved in 1492. No one realised at the time that this was one of the most important events in history, that they just started European exploration and colonialism in the Americas, and its consequences. But months later, the scariest experience of Isabella's life overshadowed that. She found herself far from Ferdinand when he needed her most. On December 7th, 1492, a peasant rushed past the king's entourage. One second, Ferdinand was walking down the steps of his Barcelona palace, the next he collapsed onto the ground as blood flooded around him. Ferdinand's gold necklace protected him from being beheaded, but not from a deep gash in his neck. A battalion of doctors raced to save the king's life. When Isabella found out, her instinct was to race to her husband. Then she remembered who she was. Isabella had countless enemies, so she assumed a coup was underway. With a kingdom at stake, she couldn't afford to be sentimental and impulsive. If there was a coup, her 14-year-old son and heir, Juan, was the next target. Only after making arrangements to have him rowed out to sea did Isabella allow herself to go to Ferdinand. Ferdinand survived and there was no coup, but Isabella still was deeply affected. For the first time in her life, the Queen wasn't sure of her righteousness. She made a list of the sins she'd committed in her quest for power. It was a long one. Isabella and Ferdinand had 7 children, 5 of whom survived to adulthood. Then their only son died soon after marrying in 1496. Another daughter, Isabella, died giving birth in 1498. So, Isabella's heir was now her 3rd daughter, Joanna. Isabella was Spain's first great queen, and she wondered if she'd be the last. Joanna's mental health was deteriorating, and as Isabella herself got sicker, she worried that her kingdom wouldn't survive after her. When months passed with her bedridden, Isabella had to face the truth. Her time was almost up. She spent these final months getting her affairs in order. She had a long list of accomplishments and a long list of atrocities. Now might have been the time to repent. Instead, she doubled down. She didn't believe she had anything to repent, and she didn't have any regrets when she took her last breath. But she did have one final wish. When she asked Ferdinand not to marry again, she had 2 motivations. The first was jealousy. Ferdinand's mistresses already caused enough grief, so the thought of a new wife would have made her sick. The second was politics. Him having legitimate kids with another wife jeopardised her kingdom and her kids' futures. Ferdinand promised he wouldn't remarry. 2 years after Isabella's death, 53-year-old Ferdinand married 14-year-old Germaine of Foix, a French noble girl. While this was a political match and part of a treaty, it was still creepy. Outsiders even noticed Ferdinand's appetite for his child bride. People in Castile fumed at his betrayal of Isabella. Most rulers can only dream of Isabella's accomplishments. She was the first and greatest Queen of Spain. She unified the country. She established the Spanish Empire. She set the foundation for Spain to become one of the richest and most powerful empires of all time. As time passed, appreciation for her accomplishments grew, but so did criticisms of her dark side. Her intolerance, her use of force, the Spanish Inquisition, and the negative effects of the Spanish Empire. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.